Okay, picture this. You're standing in the middle of a desert, right? The air is all thick and hazy with this toxic dust. You look down, and at your feet, seashells. And then you look up, and you see these giant, rusted-out skeletons of fishing ships just looming over you, stranded in an ocean of sand. Now, this isn't some crazy dream. This was the Aral Sea, and this is the story of how one of the world's biggest lakes was literally murdered, and how a piece of it, against all odds, was brought back from the dead. You know, this quote just cuts right to the heart of it. For thousands and thousands of years, this place was humming with life. And now, it's this symbol of ecological disaster, a silent monument to a screw-up of almost unimaginable scale. So that's the big question here, isn't it? How does an entire sea just die? Was it some kind of natural disaster? Or was it something way more deliberate, a calculated sacrifice? All right. Let's dive in and figure this out. To really get a grip on the death of the Aral Sea, we first have to understand what it was. We need to rewind the clock, go back before the silence, to a time when it was this shimmering, massive oasis, just teeming with life. I mean, we're not just talking about any old lake here. For 20,000 years, the Aral Sea was a freshwater giant, the fourth largest on the entire planet. It was fed by these two huge rivers, the Amu Darya and the Sir Darya, and it was basically a miracle in the middle of the Central Asian desert. It was the lifeblood for the whole region. And what's so wild is the complete reversal. It wasn't just a slow decline, it was a total flip, from being this source of life to a source of death. A thriving ecosystem becomes a toxic desert. Millions of fish become a ship graveyard. Bustling ports become ghost towns. I mean, the sheer scale of this change just makes you ask, what on earth could possibly lead to a catastrophe like this? So, what happened? Well, the story really kicks off with military ambition and ends with this grand agricultural dream that turned into an absolute nightmare. This is where human hands get all over the crime scene. You can see how this all ramped up over a century. It started way back with the Russian Empire, literally dragging warships across sand dunes to control the sea. But the real kill shot, that came later, when the Soviet Union decided that the water in the rivers was way more valuable than the sea they created. And this was the reason, this was the motive: white gold, cotton. The Soviet Union looked at the deserts of Central Asia and didn't see a desert, they saw a future cotton empire. The only thing they needed was water, and they knew exactly where they were going to get it. And that was the directive. There was no discussion. At any cost. The two great rivers that had nourished the Aral Sea for 20,000 years were going to be rerouted to irrigate the desert. The sea itself, they actually called it a mistake of nature, this useless evaporator that was just in the way of progress. So let's be clear, they knew what was going to happen. They just didn't care. The plan to grow cotton worked, but the price was paid almost instantly, and it was catastrophic. The great dying began. The sea didn't just get smaller, it turned toxic. You can see just how fast things went downhill right here. In the 1960s, the sea starts to drop. By the 70s, that rate more than doubles. And by the 1980s, it's losing a whole meter of water every single year. The coastline was shrinking so fast, you could practically stand there and watch it disappear. So, as all that water vanished, the salt and minerals that were left behind got super concentrated. The salinity just went through the roof, from a mild 10 grams per liter to a deadly 376. Just to give you some perspective, a normal ocean is around 35 grams per liter. This wasn't salty water anymore. It was a chemical soup where absolutely nothing could live. And here's where it really hits home: the human cost. The fishing industry, which supported 60,000 jobs, didn't decline. It just stopped. Overnight, gone. Bustling port cities suddenly found themselves beached in the middle of a desert, miles and miles from the water. People had no choice. They had to leave everything behind: their homes, their history, their lives. And this is what was left behind: a huge, poisoned desert dotted with the resting hulks of abandoned ships, a graveyard, the skeleton of the sea. I mean, you couldn't come up with a more perfect or more heartbreaking description for this man-made hellscape. You'd think it couldn't get any worse, right? Well, the disaster didn't stop at the water's edge. The death of the sea actually unleashed a whole new set of horrors that threatened the entire region, and maybe even the world. So here's the absolutely cruelest twist. All the pesticides and chemicals they used on the cotton fields, for decades it had all washed into the sea and settled on the bottom. When the water disappeared, that toxic gunk was exposed to the air. Every single gust of wind picked up this poison cocktail and blew it over villages and cities, creating a public health nightmare for 5 million people. And as if poison dust wasn't bad enough, get this. Right in the middle of the Aral Sea was a top-secret Soviet bioweapons lab. On an island called Возрождение, which ironically means rebirth, they tested things like weaponized anthrax and smallpox. So what happens when the sea dries up? Well, the island wasn't an island anymore. It connected to the mainland, creating a land bridge to literally one of the most dangerous places on Earth, where deadly anthrax spores are just waiting in the soil. The fallout just kept coming. See, that massive sea acted like a giant natural air conditioner for the whole region. Once it was gone, the climate just went haywire. Summers became scorching hot. Winters became brutally cold. The weather patterns that used to bring rain just vanished. And instead, they got these constant, toxic dust storms that carried poison for hundreds of kilometers. For decades, this was a story without a glimmer of hope. The Aral Sea was written off, gone forever. But then, against all odds, a small group of people decided they weren't giving up. They decided to try the impossible, bring a sea back to life. And here was the plan, the North Aral Dam. The strategy was, well, it was both brilliant and brutal. They basically admitted they couldn't save the whole sea. So they built a dam to seal off the smaller northern part, and then they funneled all the water from one of the rivers just into that one section. They sacrificed the majority to save a minority. And the results? They were nothing short of a miracle. Seriously, look at this. Right after the dam was finished in 2005, the water level started to rise, and it rose fast. What experts thought would take decades happened in just a few months. Today, the water level in the North Aral is up by over 40%. It's incredible. And this wasn't just numbers on a chart. This was real life coming back. The water got less salty. Fish started showing up again. And for the first time in a generation, fishermen actually took their boats back out on the water. The air even started to feel different, a little bit of humidity that had been missing for years. It's truly one of the greatest environmental success stories ever. So the story of the Aral Sea is a terrifying warning, right? It's about what happens when we put profit ahead of the planet. But the story of the North Aral, that's a powerful story of hope. It's proof that nature is resilient and that with some smarts and determination, even the worst damage isn't always permanent. It proves that even from the very brink of collapse, recovery is possible. And that leaves us with a pretty big question. If we can bring a sea back from the dead, what else